Alrighty, here we are back with the truck. I figure since I haven't really done anything, we should probably do something. I've just introduced you guys to the projects. I see we have a couple more subscribers, so here we go. We'll take our asses off. Now this thing I suspect has a water leak of some sort on the intake because of how rusty the last block was when we pulled it all apart. So I have a new intake. I'm going to pull this apart and we'll just swap it out. So for now, one of the first things you want to do is open the peacock valve on your petcock, whatever it is, on your radiator, and pull the cap and at least drain the antifreeze water, whatever you run in your coolant. At least drain it about 50% so the radiator's just about under half full. And then disconnect your battery as well, because in my application I have to screw with alternator wires, so you don't want to have the charge wire hitting anything and sparking. We'll get this top end pulled apart here. Just bear with me for a few moments. Start with some throttle linkage. And a little impact would be lovely for this shit. It's still old school, so I've always just jumped into my ratchets and my screwdrivers and whatnot, but yes, a little impact would be nice for this. Okay, now mine is just a bolt as far as my throttle, how the throttle linkage hooks up. It depends on your application, how everything is. We should just pull this guy into, let me see. This thing hasn't been started in a while, so I'm hoping we don't have much fuel pressure. We'll loosen the line for now and we'll actually pull the hose off when I'm ready to pull it. Give me a second here. You have your carburetor, depending on if it's carburetor or throttle body, it's still probably held on the same way with 4 1/2-inch bolts. You want to get the hardware out of the way just so you don't accidentally drop it down in the intake, even though you're pulling it. It can go farther down into the engine than you would like. So I would suggest strongly to never drop bolts into your engine. But sometimes shit happens. Okay, so the last thing we're going to have here is a couple vacuum lines in the back. One for the distributor and one for the brakes and the PCV. Excuse me, PVC, or no, PCV. Okay, and as I was hoping, there was not a lot of fuel pressure on that line, so we didn't lose too much fuel at all. It's been a while since we've started this thing. That spacer's stuck a little more than I'd like. I'll grab it real quick. Oh, here we go. Always something. That it's got itself stuck on this. I even have to change the carb gasket.
What's that?
Now, if you have to go through this step, you want to make sure you have something that's not all scratched up and chafed up if you're scratching across the intake here, because you don't want to scar it up. I guess this one's old, but depending on what you're doing with your application, you still don't want to scratch it up. This intake's not in terrible shape. We'll have it looked at. We could mill it and put it back into action at some point in time. Which may or may not be an option. We'll see. This thing could be toast, like I said. But if it's not, I'm gonna keep it around and we'll put it back at work, put it back into work at some point in time. Excuse me. Okay, the next thing we'll do is pull all the spark plug wires. The real simple firing order of the 1-8-4-3-6-5-7-2. Okay. Just out of the way for now. Fucking out of the way. Pull that ignition wire. You want to make sure you don't misplace that at any point. Get a pinch between the new intake or anything of that matter. Okay, screwdriver. Let's get rid of these heater lines. One will be a heater feed and one will be a heater drain. Doesn't much matter, they both gotta go in order. I have them numbered just so I don't have to track the wires every time I do it. But, okay, hold on. The 9/16 on the old distributor back here. What we're gonna wanna do before we pull the distributor out is I always like to do, just to speed up the process, is get the engine on top dead center and the compression stroke, which if your distributor is set up right, your rotor will be pointing at cylinder number 1 once the cap is off. And that's not always done like that. Sometimes people just realign the wires to however their shit's wired up. I always make sure the rotor's pointing at cylinder 1, yada yada. Okay, and we are not too far off from top dead center on the compression stroke. So just stay where you're at, Michelet. And what I'm going to do is tap the starter. You see that, the metal part on the rotor there? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to want it to be, this to be just past that. So just let me tap it. I mean, that's barely. Oh, you know what? Hold on a moment. In order to bump the starter, we might have to get some juice. Oh, shit. Okay. So there's something we probably shouldn't have done first, was pull the card. So one thing on a normal engine is when you turn on that key, the fuel pump only runs for 2 seconds or so, and then it shuts off. This doesn't have the safety switch installed, so it's full time just pumping. 2 seconds we can deal with. 5 or 6, not so much. All right, hold on. Trying to do is find a bolt big enough to plug this guy, because the quickest, easiest route with the turbo exhaust on here now, the crossover tube, it's kind of hard to get a torque wrench on the flywheel or on the crank. So We just bump the starter until it's lined up, ish. Okay. Let me have us a look-see here. Okay. Just like I said, keep an eye on that rotor.
One more. A little more. Oh, maybe it is.
Let me take a look. Nope, nope, it needs to be one.
I said that. Okay. All good, all good.
Okay, hold on. It needs a little more still yet. The thing is down here.
You said
Yes,
speed
no,
limit.
to be just past that. It's fine. That's where it's at is fine for right now. But you see on the harmonic balancer, which I had to change out, that's why it's discolored from the rest of the engine. That line needs to be right here in the center of the big gap. That's a dead top dead center 0.
So that has
So-
to come around and that has to be there in
Well,
order for that to be right.
In order for that to line up right there, that should be pointing at number 1, like I say, and we're right there. We're just one more bump up, which we have to be careful because we can easily jump past it. And we don't have to be right on either, because I'll explain that when we get back together.
A little more.
Okay, hold on, let me have a look-see just so I have an idea. Okay.
Oh, too much.
Yeah, it happens. It happens quick, but how much too much?
Like
Like a full
3
foot.
inches, 3 inches.
That's about it. Yeah, it's about 2 inches, not quite. But it's still a pain in the ass. Okay, let me rotate it all the way around, see if we can get it closer. Like I say, with how everything is, it would be easy to put back in and line up, but I'd like to show everybody right from the top left center.
Nothing happened.
That's because we have a loose, the wire's loose over here. Power supply is weak.
Not even close.
I know, I just needed to know.
Oh, too far again. Keep going. A little bit. Just a little one.
I know, but let me see. Because it's right at the top of its stroke, so once it gets there and gets to the top and starts to go back down, it's really easy for it to go past.
I know. That's why I said a small one.
If she's grabbing compression, the rings really haven't.
Another tiny one. We haven't even seen it yet. Can you see it?
Yeah, it's going to be directly on top. Yeah, you won't be able to see it unless you get back a little bit. Yeah, so let me get it over there. Look at the road. Where are we at? Close?
Yes. Perfect. I think
It's probably close.
it's at the end of the
That's close enough.
mark.
Yes, that is close enough. Okay, so you see we're just barely, I guess this would be retarded. Yes, it is retarded a little bit. Anyway. Yes.
Do you want to
that's
do it
retarded.
again?
No, that's retarded. After is retarded, before is advanced. Yes. Okay, and you see how our rotor is almost pointed directly. It pretty much is pointed directly at number 1 still. See, that's where I wasn't very happy with it before. I think it was a half a tooth off because the distributor was rotated too much. All right, hop off of here, woman. Thank you. Okay, so I see we're that was nice. I see we're starting to lose light. Get back to disconnecting that power, and we're gonna have to pull this too. We don't want it flopping around, but for now it should be okay. Actually, that's a good spot for it. Okay, so like I say, we want to pull 10 millimeter off of the alternator, which should never be super snug anyway, because you'll break the internals of the alternator if you over tighten those. So those are always just barely just over snug. Just tight enough to where it's not going to vibrate loose all the time. This piece of shit is temporary anyway. Okay, and then you're going to have to pull the distributor mount all the way off. Which mine has a ground hanging off of it. Okay, so you see the basics of it. I gave you the rundown on what you should do before you pull the intake. Just give me a few minutes to get my shit together here. I'll get this intake off and I'll get back with you guys right before we install the new one. Alrighty, here we are. No intake, and it turns out after a small inspection that intake is probably okay. So we need to get ready to put our new guy on. I just did a little touch-up paint up here because we didn't do any painting up there on the original build. Now most of the time you would, I don't know, cover those up or paint the entire thing. It doesn't really matter to me as far as we're putting on a Felpro, so it's a felt gasket. It doesn't really matter as much as like if you had a multi-layered steel gasket in an area like that. You probably wouldn't want to overspray where the intake bolts down to, but in this application, who gives a shit? Now there's a big debate on the front and rear seals of these things. People always say they fail, yada yada. I always run the motherfuckers and never had a problem with it. So I'm going to run them on this. And as far as putting sealant on the intake gasket, I run a little layer of sealant just around the coolant passages. Anywhere that has gas going through it, don't worry about sealing it up. But as far as around the coolant passages, just go ahead. I forgot I just back this off. Here we go. Get this. Okay, that's a little bit more better. Alright, so back to it. We're going to get some silicone right here where the gasket would go. Are you really being a bitch? Hold on a moment. Well, we know how to deal with bitches like you. Just work on the gas till it's a little bigger. And then you'll shut the fuck up and start cooperating, huh? Okay, anyway. Back to engine work. Here we go. A little silicone around the coolant passages. And on the front and rear seals as well. Like I say, this is a little strong on the sealant, but it'll be okay. Just needs to be a thin layer. Say most of the time it's unnecessary, but I still choose to do it. And you get where the front and rear seals go. Like I say, most people have the big debate on whether or not to even run those things, but I always do. All right, hold on a moment. Okay. Basically the same thing. There's little dowel holes that you need to stick those in. Don't have big excess sealant going inside or outside of the block, just rub it off on the gasket itself there. Of course, we don't own the rights to that music, so be careful with that. Okay. This has a little groove where the side gaskets right in place on it, so just make sure they're sitting in their little grooves, which I will show you in a moment. Alright, hold on. Now these guys you're going to want to install with the stripes facing upward. And they'll be the same. Doesn't matter which side they go on, they're the same either side. Like I say, make sure these guys sit in their little grooves at the top of that rubber seal, which is one thing that people might have a problem with, is not installing that gasket correctly. Then I can see how it could be an issue. But as long as you're not an absolute moron, everything should go okay. A little bit of silicone around the water passages. A lot of silicone on the end of this motherfucker. Back to a little bit on the passages. See how excited we are? You want to make sure that on the raised part of the gasket there's no break in the silicone, otherwise it's worthless. If you raise it up a little bit here or there, but as I say with the Velcro, it shouldn't be an issue, as this is a smash type gasket. Still just take your finger around there and make sure everything's nice and solid. Because if this engine wasn't used before you pulled the intake, more than likely you're going to have water at the bottom. The front passages don't as much, but my back passages have water right at the inlets. So make sure there's enough shit on that motherfucker right there. Just a little bit more for good measures. Ooh. Alright, hold on a moment. I'm going to grab this new intake. Clean my fucking fingers off. Now, there's also great debate about letting your silicone set up for an hour or whatnot before you install the intake, but here again, I've never had an issue, so we're going to treat it that way. So we've never had an issue with that. Shit ton of gasket there, sealer. A little more than we need. Okay, so the intake is on there. It's going to set for a minute. I have all these bolts that have Teflon tape wrapped around them. I need to get cleaned off, so I'm going to do that, and I'll get back with you guys here in a minute. Okay, here we are. We got the bolts cleaned up. Installing Teflon tape to reinstall. Now this stuff is worthless unless you go around the bolt at least 3 times with it, which it says on the directions, but I mean, not everybody always reads the directions. So I am going to get these all Teflon taped and threaded in, and I'll get back with you guys here in a second when it's time to torque them down. Alrighty, here it is. It is lightly installed. Everything's snug down. We're going to go through the torque procedure, which torque specs are 25 pounds, and honestly, I never use a torque wrench at this period. I always just go a little over snug. So we will do the same as I always do. You guys can do what you like. I'd call that 25. 25 is just going to be well over snug, but don't need to manhandle it. Don't do the dumb monkey. No right turn, Clyde. Just get it nice and snug, and it should treat you good. Now these things have a torque spec you have to follow. Front 2 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, and I forget this guy will not take the socket. It's pretty tight. The hex head still spins, but honestly an Allen set would probably been ideal for it. And I would call that 25-ish. Okay. Okay, and that was, here we are, number 10. This was 8, 9, 10. 11. 12. 13. Okay, and this one is obviously a tight fit with the socket as well. So you have to make sure you're holding it straight on there. Okay, 15. 16. Okay, there we are. Now, again, this is the Speedmaster RPM air gap thing. You want to put a towel or whatever, rag in the carburetor hole while you're working on it. Same as the distributor gap. You don't want to drop anything down in there. Now, as far as these go, it's going to get a fresh thermostat. Anytime I pull the intake, I change the thermostat, whether it needs it or not. And hold on a moment. Go ahead and take a picture, or just show them this guy here, just so they can. So what do we need to re-record? Okay. Sometimes the camera girl's a pain in the butt. It is late at night, so it cannot be her fault. Did you just make a really easy thing really hard? Mm-hmm. Did you?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might find it cute how you do that all the time. Me? Not so much. But anyway, it's late at night and let's get this. I'm only gone just a little bit farther. So here we are, how to stab the distributor. Get that piece of shit out of the hole first off. Now for me, these wires should always be pretty much straight facing the the front of the truck there. Oh, here we go. It's never gonna fit again. There it is, not in. If we go back how it was, it's right there. It's stabbed all the way down, and that thing is pretty much, it's actually in between 1 and 3, which I don't like, especially since we're already past the mark on the harmonic balancer. So let me show you a little trick. Let's just move the rotor, which is really easy. Some people can't figure this guy out, but pull this up, and as you're pulling it up, kind of rotate it clockwise if you can, when you can. And you get the head, and bam, there you are. You can rotate that rotor around and the oil pump shaft around with the distributor. There's no reason to get anything else to point at it. I want to say this should be good, because as we back up, we're going to come, yeah, that should be directly on our mark that we need. If not, I'll deal with it when the time comes. But like I say, I'm really particular with the number 1 spark plug wire being lined up with the number 1 cylinder. It's not a big deal. You can rotate the wires around as needed, but I'm picky about it. Okay, so for now, we are at a good stopping point. We have to get plugs for some of this, which I just have these little sensor plugs in there for now, just so I can paint it without gumming up the treads. And get this distributor mount most of the way on here, and kind of snuggish, like snuggish ruggish. Let's see here. Chang chang. Okay, it's snug, but not too snug. And actually, while we are here kind of fucking with time, that guy needs to be installed on number 15 bolt hole. So like I say, just while we're here with everything, and ideally, so you don't have to loosen this and put it back on. You might have wanted to do that before, but I always like to snug it down before I put my accessories and shit up here. Which, if I was thinking what I would have done, it's not Teflon taped it just yet until after I did that. Give me a moment. Let me clean this guy up. I'll be right back. Straggler holding on for dear life. Okay. Wire wheel and a drill is ideal for these. And one other trick for Teflon tape is put it in your right hand and righty-tighty it, and you'll always have it threaded up the way it needs to go. Some people have a hard time figuring it out, some don't. But there's the trick. Put it in your hand and righty-tighty it. It will thread up the way it needs to be. Okay. So there's our bracket. Some fresh Teflon tape. Like I say, those 2 water passages in the back need to be plugged, as well as this guy here. This one here is going to need to have a different fitting installed, which we may or may not have to change that hose. We'll see when the moment comes. And as far as putting the carburetor on tonight, I probably won't, because kind of laid waste to the lower gasket, which I suppose I could look in my stockpile and see if I have a gasket for it. But you know what, this actually might line up differently. We'll see. We'll have to figure it out. Hold on a moment. One more moment, please. Are we lucky? Let's see. Are we lucky? Come on over here, Michelet. Let's see if we have the parts we need today. Fuck no. Nope. We are not lucky. Like I say, we will be installing carburetor tomorrow, as well as a couple little odds and ends. So for tonight, that is that. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I will talk to you guys. We'll get back at this tomorrow night. So I will see you tomorrow.